It's April 13th, 2016, and this is a commentary about Sam Harris. The moral blindness of Sam Harris. I have been a fan of Sam Harris in the past. Sam Harris is part of the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, and as an atheist ex-Mormon, I have some appreciation for atheist things in general, although there are some caveats about that, which you can see on my blog. But in any case, the moral blindness of Sam Harris. So Sam Harris has a great, a high moral sense for the suffering of non-human animals, to such an extent that he has now set himself up for a course for possible and probable, in my view, and the view of certain other people, Parkinson's disease. Veganism probably leads to Parkinson's. Could, can, might, risky, be careful. But in any case, Mr. Harris has become a vegan, mostly. And so he has a high moral sense on that. But then I heard on a recent podcast where he was talking about circumcision. That is the genital cutting that goes on in males and females. And he's basically gave, in my view, a very kind of bland statements, proclamations about how male circumcision is probably not a good thing, but that female circumcision is just so much worse, and horror. So he doesn't use the word horror with regard to male circumcision, but he's quite quick to use it in the case of female. And so there is a variation with regard to the amount of cutting of flesh which happens in the males and female. In the female version, there's variation that happens, and the most common version, like in Europe and stuff, is not the more drastic type. But I realize there's various levels of cutting, okay? But in the boys, is it appropriate to use the word horror? If you go online, you can see videos and photos of, these little boys being cut, screaming for their lives. And then you realize what the result is. Permanent exposure of tissue, which is supposed to be covered 99.99% of the time. And it changes it. And it removes tissue which is not replaceable. All this is findable online, this information. And 15 square inches is the resultant loss of skin in the adult. A little bit of skin in a kid, but a lot of skin resultant loss in an adult. And the main impact comes when you're an adult. So Harris said, oh, circumcision doesn't affect me, and it didn't affect me very much. I'm a circumcised man. No problem for me. I agree that they probably shouldn't do it, but it's not a horror. It's not a horror compared to what happens to girls. That's the where you can only use the word horror. So screaming little boys having a part of their penis ripped off, cut off, usually with no anesthesia. That's not a horror. But doing it to girls is a horror. How about, can we just say that it's a horror for both? Now, it's possible to go and interview the women who advocate for female genital cutting.
the adult women and ask them what's their opinion. Do they think it's a good idea? Now we have people like Aeon Hersey Ali who don't think it's a good idea. But there's women who organize these cutting events of the young girls. Women organize it. Women advocate for it. Go ask them, what do they think about it? And you'll get the same type of apologist bullshit that we hear from the voice of, of people like de facto Sam Harris, who said, oh, it's not a horror for boys, no big deal. No big deal, it didn't hurt me. It's not a horror. Well, there has to be a huge distinction between what happens to boys and girls, because it didn't bother me. Well, didn't bother you. Don't know what you're missing. That's one key thing, Mr. Harris. You don't know what you're missing with regard to the part of your penis that was cut off. Do some research. Some people have. Now there's a secret group on Facebook called Men Affected by Circumcision. Okay? You probably can't find it because it's a secret group, but I know about it. So, and then with the people, the people in San Francisco who are working to outlaw circumcision, there's lots of men who feel affected by circumcision, by the genital rape that happened to them as little boys. 15 square inches, 15 square inches of skin. And where's that skin go? Huh? What's that skin do? What's on that skin that's irreplaceable? What's that skin for? All those questions you can find answers to. Quick and easy answers. Okay? It's not just a little piece of skin that's just for nothing. And there is an impact. And some men do feel impacted. And for little boys who have this happen to them, in all cases, it is a horror. So yes, there's worse things that happen to little girls with regard to removal of the clitoris or the, sewing up of the skin. But those procedures are less common. And even if they were more common, look, it's genital cutting of little kids. That phrase applies to both cases. Cutting the genitals of little kids, permanently impacting them as adults. Those sentences apply to both cases. So your tepid and boring and pedantic and kind of lame statements about how it's a horror for girls and not for boys just doesn't fly. And this deal where you're super concerned about animals so much that you're sort of like a Jane elder who has to have a cheesecloth around his mouth, virtually de facto, so you can get Parkinson's disease because of forced malnutrition. That's kind of a contrast between your very shallow opposition for male circumcision, male genital rape. All right. So anyway, Harris is a useful guy from a utilitarian perspective, speaking the truth about the abuses of Islam and so on, and having these conversations with people. I like his conversations mostly, but Harris can become a little bit boring himself when he shows these rather blatant blind spots that he has, where he's really interested in the suffering of non-human animals, but he's kind of tepid and no big deal about the raping of the genitals of human males when they're little boys, and the screaming that happens with that, and the 15 square inches of non-replaceable skin that has specific purposes. You want to know what those purposes are? Just Google for them. You'll find the information. Okay. It's not just for nothing. Just because you're ignorant to the loss of it doesn't mean other men are affected by it, or that there's some damn good reasons to not F up the genitals of little boys and little girls, both, okay? Both in the same pot. In the same pot, there's no reason to have a separation between this conversation, between male genital rape and female genital rape. It's in the same pot. Why separate it? Why do you even care about separating it unless you want to be an apologist for the rape of little boys, the genital rape of little boys? That's the only reason to have a separation, unless you want to have de facto support. Now, the Jewish religion is fucking people up on this front. The Jewish religion is responsible for a lot of fucking suffering on this front. So is that a reason why people want a separation between talking about male and female? Could be, probably. Apology for child abuse. That's the result. Okay, that's it.